Look at these black people pretending they belong in our neighborhood. I'm calling the police right now." The white woman's voice cut through the wedding ceremony like shattered glass. A hush fell over the gathering as if someone had pressed pause on the moment. The officiant's words died in his throat. The string quartet lowered their bows mid-note. Guests froze in their seats, their gasps audible in the still air. The bride, Amara Bennett, clutched her bouquet so tightly that the stems bent beneath her grip, her knuckles pale against the spray of delicate white lilies. Her chest rose and fell as her eyes filled with tears. She refused to release "not here. Not now. Not at her own wedding." Her gown, layers of hand-stitched lace, trembled as though it carried the weight of the insult itself. Then, as if summoned by Diane Reynolds' venom, two police cruisers screeched to a halt outside the gates of Lakeside Gardens. Red and blue lights splashed against the pristine white gazebo where vows had just been spoken. Doors slammed. Officers emerged with deliberate caution, their hands hovering close to their holsters, as if danger lingered in the summer air. Diane strutted forward to meet them. Her every gesture exaggerated for the audience. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the wedding party, her voice ringing with the confidence of someone who had gotten away "I've lived next to this venue for 15 years," she declared. "I've lived next to this venue for the entire assembly to hear," she declared. "These people broke in. Enough for the entire assembly to hear. They're trespassing. These people need to be removed immediately. They don't belong here." Confusion rippled through the crowd, followed swiftly by outrage. Removed immediately. Guests rose to their feet, voices overlapping, followed swiftly by outrage. Amara's father stepped protectively toward the aisle, voices overlapping in protest. Jaw set with fury. Amara's father stepped protectively to hold him back toward the aisle. Sheriff Darnell Taylor, jaw set with fury. The man Diane had just accused of criminal trespass at his own wedding remained motionless. Sheriff Darnell Taylor, the groom, the son glinted off his cufflinks as he straightened his trespass at his own wedding, remained motionless for a beat, whispering frantically in his ear. His cufflinks as he straightened his tie with calm precision. Except to slide his hand slowly into his jacket pocket. His best man leaned in, whispering frantically in his ear. Spread like a predator. But Darnell didn't move except to slide his hand slowly into his jacket, loud enough for guests in the back row to hear. Diane's smile spread like a predator sensing he's probably got a weapon. She hissed to the nearest officer, loud enough for guests in the back row to hear. But when Darnell withdrew his hand, it wasn't a weapon, he revealed. Gasps. Instead, sunlight flared across a polished silver badge. But when Darnell withdrew his hand, it wasn't a weapon, Darnell Taylor, County Sheriff's Department. Sunlight flared across a polished cutting through the tension like a command. "Sheriff Darnell Taylor, this is my wedding. County reserved this venue 6 months ago." His voice cutting through the tension like a command. The nearest officer faltered, his hand falling away from his holster as realization dawned. "I reserved this venue 6 months ago." Diane's smug expression collapsed into a mask of horror, his hand falling away from his holster as realization dawned. For a heartbeat, Diane's smug expression collapsed into a mask of horror, the blood draining from her face. How would the celebration recover after being scarred so deliberately by racial profile? The badge gleamed like a verdict. Because this wasn't just a wedding anymore. How would the celebration recover after being scarred so deliberately by racial profiling? Because this wasn't just a wedding anymore. It had become a test. The venue stretched before them like a dream made real, manicured lawns rolling down to a sparkling lake. The late afternoon sun painting everything in a golden glow. White chairs sat in precise rows, all facing a rose-draped arch twined with ivy. It was even more beautiful than the glossy brochures. Amara drew a sharp breath and squeezed Darnell's hand, her eyes wide with delight. Her smile carried both joy and disbelief, the radiance of a woman seeing her vision made flesh. "It's perfect," she whispered. Thomas, the venue coordinator, appeared briskly from the side path, clipboard in hand. His grin stretched ear to ear. "The happy couple arrives," he declared warmly. "Everything's right on schedule. Catering staff is setting up inside. The florist just finished the arch. We'll be ready." Darnell nodded in satisfaction, surveying the scene like a man who had fought for every detail to fall into place. Months of planning, and it's all coming together. Then, from across the pristine lawn, a flicker of movement caught his eye. At the property line stood a woman. Her khaki pants were pressed to a crease, her polo shirt tucked with military precision. Arms folded, shoulders tight. She regarded the scene with a posture that reeked of disapproval. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just watched. Meanwhile, a caravan of cars rolled in, announcing the arrival of Amara's family. Doors burst open, and laughter spilled across the lawn. Parents, siblings, and cousins emerged with boxes of decorations, framed photographs, and handmade details meant to stitch their story into the setting. Her grandmother's hand-painted unity candle was passed carefully from hand to hand, His cousins shouted instructions and teased one another over who was helping and who wasn't. The atmosphere transformed the elegant venue, gaining soul, warmth, and identity with every ribbon tied and every photo placed. But from her vantage point, Diane Reynolds narrowed her eyes. She did not see family. She did not see love. She saw intrusion. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her gaze raking over the black family in their informal attire. Bustling joyfully, unapologetically. "Lakeside Gardens has certainly gone downhill," she muttered. "Franklin never should have taken over from his father. These people can't possibly be clients who would rent the entire venue to them." Her hand slipped into her pocket. A phone appeared. Her thumbs scrolled with practiced ease until she found the venue's office number. She pressed call. "Closed for a private event." The automated voice ended the call. But Diane didn't bother leaving a message. Her jaw tightened, muscles twitching as if restraint itself was painful. Across the lawn, Darnell caught her staring. He froze mid-motion, a box of decorations in his hands, his sheriff's instincts pricking at the unease radiating from her. For a moment he considered walking over, introducing himself, dispelling suspicion with civility, but then he shook his head. Not today. Today belonged to love, not confrontation. Amara's father joined him at the trunk, following his gaze. "We being watched?" he murmured, low and guarded. "It's nothing," Darnell replied smoothly, yet in his chest, a familiar weight settled like armor. "Let's focus on making this the best day of Amara's life." But Diane was not finished. Her phone appeared again, her thumb darting with resolve. This time she dialed with purpose, her expression carved from stone. Minutes later, the ceremony began. Guests drifted to their seats, their chatter softening into reverent hush. A string quartet's music floated across the lake, weaving serenity into the air. At the altar, Darnell stood tall beside his best man, Aaron. Aaron adjusted his cufflinks one final time, giving him a teasing grin. "You ready for this?" "Been ready for years," Darnell answered, scanning the sea of familiar faces. Colleagues from the sheriff's department sat shoulder to shoulder with Amara, as hospital co-workers. Two worlds merging in unity. His heart swelled. This was what he had dreamed of. Then, at the edge of the perfect tableau, Diane advanced like a storm cloud. She intercepted Thomas, the venue coordinator, her steps brisk, her tone sharp enough to slice the music in half. "Excuse me? I need to speak with you about this event." Thomas, ever the professional, offered his rehearsed smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is a private wedding. If you're not on the guest list, I've lived next to Lakeside Gardens for 15 years. Diane snapped, cutting him off. Her voice rose, pulling nearby eyes toward her. "I know every event that happens here. These people can't just show up and take over." Thomas's smile faltered. He drew a measured breath. "Ma'am, this is a legitimate, fully paid reservation. The Taylor Bennett wedding has been on our calendar for months." "I want to see documentation," Diane demanded, chin lifting in defiance. "I know the owner personally. Can't share client information," Thomas replied, his patience thinning. "No, please, I must insist that you leave. This is a private event." But Diane's eyes had already locked on Franklin Whitmore, the venue owner who stood by the reception tent discussing details with the caterers. Without hesitation, she brushed past Thomas, her heels striking the ground with indignation. Franklin Whitmore, he turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Diane, what are you doing here?" She lowered her voice, leaning close with urgency that sounded almost conspiratorial. "There's an unauthorized use of the property happening right now." "Did you approve this gathering?" Franklin frowned. "Of course I did. It's the Taylor Bennett wedding." "Are you sure?" she pressed, her voice hushed, her gaze darting pointedly toward the predominantly black crowd. "They claim they have a reservation, but something about this doesn't seem right." Franklin shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her insinuation creeping into his thoughts. His brow knit tighter as he looked past her toward the altar, where love and joy were blossoming, unaware. "Let me check on this," he muttered, striding toward the ceremony. And just like that, doubt had been planted. Franklin approached the altar quietly, his expression careful. He stopped beside Aaron first, whispering something in his ear. Aaron's brow furrowed, his jaw hardening. He gestured toward Darnell, who excused himself from a brief exchange with the officiant and stepped aside. "Mr. Taylor," Franklin began, extending a hand. I'm Franklin Whitmore, the owner. I apologize for the interruption, but my neighbor has raised some concerns about your reservation. Darnell's face stayed composed, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Concerns. Just a verification issue, Franklin replied, unable to meet his eyes. She's questioning the legitimacy of your booking. Without hesitation, Darnell pulled out his phone, tapped swiftly, and held up the screen. Here are the confirmation emails and proof of payment in full. 6 months ago, Diane materialized at Franklin's elbow like a shadow. Anyone can fake an email, she cut in sharply. Where's your contract? Mesos. At that moment, Amara appeared, radiant in her gown, the very image of joy now shadowed by worry. Darnell, what's going on? We're supposed to start in 5 minutes? He laid a steadying hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but firm. Nothing to worry about. Aaron, would you mind getting the contract for my briefcase in the car? Aaron's lips pressed into a thin line. With a curt nod, he turned on his heels, striding toward the parking lot. Diane's eyes swept over the decorations with exaggerated scrutiny. Her voice lifted deliberately so the guests could hear. Are all these modifications approved? The flowered arch? These lanterns? I don't recall them being part of the venue's standard offerings. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The string quartet stumbled, notes faltering. Amara's mother rose from her seat, her face tight with concern. Darnell, Amara whispered urgently. What is happening? It's just a misunderstanding, he reassured, his tone steady, though his gaze stayed locked on Diane. It'll be resolved in a minute. Amara's father joined them, his posture regal, voice measured. Is there a problem here? We are about to begin a wedding. Diane stepped subtly behind Franklin, playing the victim now. I don't feel safe with all these people here, she said, her voice pitched high enough to carry across the lawn. There are too many of them. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Franklin winced, visibly uncomfortable, but he did not correct her. Instead, he turned back to Darnell with an apologetic nod. Perhaps we could clear this up quickly. Your guests are waiting. Aaron returned, a leather portfolio in his hands. He withdrew a multi-page document and placed it firmly into Darnell's grasp. Here's the contract, Aaron said through clenched teeth. Darnell handed it to Franklin. Franklin flipped through, nodding as he read. Everything appears to be in order. Signatures, receipts, all correct. Diane leaned over, eyes narrowing at the page. That doesn't look like your handwriting, Franklin. Are you sure this is legitimate? Franklin pulled the contract away, his patience thinning. Diane, this is absolutely legitimate. The Taylor Bennett wedding is properly booked and paid for. Now, please return to your property and allow these people to celebrate. The words hung heavy in the air. A fragile victory, but the damage had been done. The ceremony was no longer untouched. Every guest had seen it. The two officers lingered at the edge of the lawn, their posture hesitant. The senior officer cleared his throat quietly. Ma'am, you reported trespassing, but this appears to be a legitimate event. Diane's voice rose above the hushed ceremony. They don't have proper authorization. I've lived here 15 years. I know it's approved. Look at all those decorations. They're damaging private property. The officers shifted uncomfortably, staying at the perimeter, trying not to intrude. But their presence was impossible to ignore. Darnell caught sight of them, just as he slid the ring onto Amara's finger. The gold band glinted in the sunlight, a fragile moment of beauty against the weight pressing in on them. They're not going to ruin this, are they? Amara whispered, barely moving her lips. Nothing will ruin this day, Darnell promised, his voice steady, squeezing her hand. Diane, watching the officer's hesitation with growing frustration, pulled out her phone. Her fingers tapped rapidly until she reached a contact. Commissioner's office. This requires someone with actual authority, she muttered, stepping aside as the call connected. The officiant raised his voice. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Applause erupted, joyous and defiant. Amara and Darnell kissed, and for a heartbeat the intrusion seemed far away. They turned toward their guests, smiling for the cameras. But as they passed the front row, Darnell leaned close to his best man. Call Chief Bennett, he whispered. Tell him his niece's wedding is being disrupted by a false police report. Then call Commissioner Jackson. It's time. Myron gave a tight nod, slipping behind a floral pillar, phone in hand. His voice was urgent but controlled. "Sir, we have a situation at Lakeside Gardens. Sheriff Taylor's wedding?" "Yes, sir." "Racial profiling." "False police report. Patrol units already dispatched." Under the reception tent, music floated gently across the lake as the band began the first song. Darnell led Amara to the dance floor, her gown sweeping gracefully across polished wood. For a moment, it looked like the fairy tale they had planned. "I'm so sorry about this," Darnell murmured against her ear as they swayed. "It's not your fault," she replied, smile held for the crowd. "Just hold me." They made one slow turn before the officers appeared again at the edge of the dance floor. Diane trailed close behind, triumph radiating from her face. "Excuse me," the senior officer said, his tone apologetic. "I regret to interrupt, but we've received another complaint about an unauthorized gathering." The music faltered. Conversations froze, mid-sentence. Darnell stopped moving, but kept Amara's hand tightly in his. "Officer," he said calmly, "perhaps we could speak privately." Before the officer could answer, Diane surged forward. "I want them removed immediately. They have no right to be here." A ripple of gasps and murmurs spread through the guests, the illusion of normalcy collapsing once again. Several guests instinctively lifted their phones, recording the confrontation as whispers rippled through the tent. Amara's father stepped forward, his dignified bearing commanding attention. "This is my daughter's wedding," he said firmly. "We paid for everything months ago. We have all the documentation." Diane waved her hand dismissively, her tone sharp and cutting. "I know every event that happens here. This was not approved through the proper channels. Franklin is being intimidated." The officers turned toward Franklin, who hovered nervously at the edge of the tent. "Sir, can you verify this reservation?" the senior officer asked. Franklin nodded, though his eyes flickered toward Diane. "Yes. The Taylor Bennett wedding is a legitimate reservation. Everything was handled properly." "He feels pressured to say that," Diane snapped, her voice climbing higher. "Look at how many of them there are. Of course, he's intimidated." The senior officer pulled his partner aside, murmuring in low tones. When they returned, his face was lined with discomfort. "Sir, ma'am, I apologize for the disruption, but given the circumstances, perhaps moving the reception indoors would help minimize disturbance and allow us to sort this out." The implication was unmistakable. "Step out of sight. Make yourselves less visible." Darnell's jaw tightened, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. He'd heard such coded solutions all his life, and each one stung like a fresh wound. He glanced at Amara, at her family, at the guests who had traveled far to celebrate this day. To make a scene now would tear the joy away even more. He swallowed his rage. "If that would help resolve the situation," he replied, his voice even but heavy with controlled anger, "then we'll comply." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the fairy lights twinkling between the trees, the lakeside view they had dreamed of, the photos they planned under a starlit sky. All of it dismantled in an instant. "We'll need to move everything inside," she whispered, her voice cracking. The officers nodded, visibly relieved. "We'll remain on site until everything is settled," the senior one assured, though it was unclear who he was trying to reassure. Reluctantly, guests began to gather decorations and carry centerpieces into the cramped hall. The grand outdoor reception, carefully designed for months, collapsed piece by piece. From the sidelines, Diane watched with her arms crossed, her smile smug and satisfied. "The venue's reputation must be maintained," she announced loudly, her words floating like poison in the air. "Standards need to be upheld." Inside the hall, the reception limped on. A room far too small for 150 guests became stifling. Servers squeezed between tightly packed chairs, and conversations clashed in awkward bursts instead of flowing freely. Darnell stood by the relocated cake table, his chest tight as he watched their dream wedding reduced to a fractured memory. Beyond the windows, the officers remained posted. Radios crackling faintly, their presence a constant reminder of humiliation. "I'm sorry about all this," Franklin murmured as he approached, hands twisting nervously. "Diane, she sits on the neighborhood association board. She has significant influence in this community." Darnell's expression remains unreadable. "I see." Franklin shifts uncomfortably, eyes fixed on the floor. She's never been this persistent before, though she has raised concerns about certain types of events in the past. "Certain types," Darnell repeats, each word deliberate. Franklin doesn't answer. The silence is answer enough. Through the window, red and blue lights flare. 3 more cruisers roll into the lot, tires crunching over gravel. Darnell's jaw tightens as uniformed officers step out, hands resting on their belts. Inside, Amara's mother presses a napkin to her eyes. All these months of planning, she whispers, voice cracking. Our baby's day ruined. Darnell excuses himself, straightening his shoulders as he strides outside. The evening air is cool, but the atmosphere simmers with tension. Diane is already there, intercepting the arriving officers before Darnell can speak. They force their way in after hours, she declares, voice pitched high with self-righteousness, claiming to have a reservation, but it's obviously falsified. Franklin's just too intimidated to admit the truth. The ranking officer, a lieutenant with silver at his temples, glances toward Darnell. Sir, we've received multiple reports of an unauthorized gathering. I'll need to see documentation. I've already provided it to the owner and the first responding officers, Darnell replies evenly. My wife and I have a valid contract. Wife. Diane interrupts sharply. She seizes on the word like a weapon. So you've already conducted a ceremony without proper verification? The lieutenant shifts uncomfortably. Given the conflicting accounts, we may need to clear the premises temporarily too. You mean shut down my wedding? Darnell cuts in, voice calm, but edged with steel. Inside, the mood collapses further. Guests whisper, gathering purses and jackets. A few begin drifting toward the door, unwilling to watch the humiliation play out. Amara appears beside Darnell, her once pristine dress now smudged from shuttling decorations. She stands tall, chin lifted. Is there a problem, officers? They won't cooperate, Diane snaps, cutting her off. They don't understand they're trespassing. Amara turns, eyes locking on Diane. Her hands tremble, but her voice is steady. This is our wedding day. We have every right to be here. Diane's lip curls. People like you always think you're entitled to whatever you want. The words drop like a stone into silence. Even the officers flinch. Darnell wraps an arm around Amara's shoulders, his voice low against her ear. Whatever he whispers makes her straighten, resolve shining through her tears. She nods once. Everyone, Darnell calls as they re-enter the hall. His voice carries over the uneasy murmur of the crowd. Please gather near the back wall. We'd like a group photo to commemorate this day. Guests exchange puzzled looks, but comply. The photographer senses something larger than a photo and raises his camera, framing the shot carefully. Meanwhile, Aaron slips quietly between relatives, passing small handwritten cards. Each family member reads, nods, then pulls out their phone to record every angle of the unfolding confrontation. Franklin's phone buzzes. He answers, voice tight. Yes, Commissioner. They're still here. Yes, it's escalated. His tone shifts as he listens further. Concern replaces his earlier hesitance. Outside, 2 unmarked sedans glide into the lot, followed by a black SUV with government plates. Men and women in tailored suits step out, scanning the scene with professional gravity. Diane straightens, mistaking them for reinforcements she summoned. She strides forward, relief in her voice. Thank you for responding so quickly. The situation is becoming untenable. The ranking officer stiffens, a hand to his earpiece. His complexion drains as he receives an urgent transmission, signals to his team, who snap to attention. Inside, Darnell faces the officers stationed near the cake table. Tell me, have you verified the complaint properly? The officer shifts uneasily. We're responding to reports of trespassing, sir. I haven't personally seen the contract. Then why? Darnell presses, his voice filling the hall. Are you treating us like criminals on our wedding day? Outside, Diane gestures toward the hall, her voice rising with indignation. They're obviously faking. Why would people like that be allowed in a place like this? Her words hang in the evening air just as the suited officials approach. Franklin returns from his call, anxiety etched across his face. His steps falter as his eyes flicker between Diane, who stands defiantly at the front, and the group of officials now striding toward the entrance with unmistakable authority. Darnell glances at his watch, then leans toward Aaron with the faintest smile. Right on time, he murmurs. The newcomers enter with measured, purposeful strides. At the front is County Commissioner Jackson, tall and broad-shouldered. his silver temples lending him the gravity of experience. Just behind him, in full uniform, is Chief of Police Bennett, his chest gleaming with the insignia of the highest law enforcement rank in the county. The atmosphere inside the hall shifts instantly. Guests fall into silence. Even the officers who had been posturing stiffen, standing straighter, their unease plain. Right. Diane, misreading the moment, rushes forward with relief softening her features. "Thank you for coming," she gushes. "These people are trespassing and refusing to leave despite multiple warnings." Commissioner Jackson regards her coolly, voice clipped. "Ms. Reynolds, we haven't formally met, but I've already heard troubling accounts about this incident." "Yes, it's completely unacceptable." Diane presses on, blind to his tone. "They've taken over the venue without authorization, and Franklin, that's not what I meant." Jackson cuts in sharply, his voice carrying steel. Before Diane can recover, Chief Bennett moves past her without so much as a glance. He walks straight to Amara, and to everyone's shock, pulls her into a warm embrace. "I'm so sorry I'm late, niece," he says loud enough for the room to hear. Traffic was terrible. A ripple of gasps runs through the crowd. "Uncle James," Amara breathes, relief flooding her voice as she clings to him. "I'm just glad you're here now." Diane freezes mid-step, her expression cracking, her mouth opens slightly, words caught in her throat, and then Darnell steps forward. Calmly, deliberately, he reaches into his jacket and withdraws a leather wallet. With a practiced flick, he raises his badge. The polished gold catches the overhead light, unmistakable. "Sheriff Darnell Taylor, County Sheriff's Department," he announces, his voice firm yet controlled. The officers who had been circling the wedding party pale visibly. A few stumbling backward as if the weight of their mistake suddenly landed squarely on their shoulders. "These officers," Darnell continues, his voice deepening with restrained authority, "responded to a false report without proper verification. They disrupted a legitimate, fully paid event on private property." Chief Bennett's face hardens as he steps beside Amara. "In a false report," he adds, his voice like a gavel, "that interrupted my niece's wedding." Diane's complexion drains. She stammers, desperation clawing at her words. I had no idea. I was only trying to prevent unauthorized use." "If you had just identified yourself earlier," Darnell cuts her off, voice low, razor sharp. "If we were a white couple, would identification have been necessary?" The silence that follows is deafening. Commissioner Jackson takes the contract Franklin now shakily presents. After skimming the pages, he looks directly at Diane. "This reservation was made 6 months ago, paid in full, or all documentation correct." Franklin clears his throat, sweat beading his brow. "Ms. Reynolds has raised concerns about certain types of events before," he admits quietly. A murmur ripples through the room. The officers who initially responded begin stumbling over apologies. "Sheriff Taylor, we had no idea." "That," Darnell interrupts, his voice cutting clean, "is precisely the problem." He turns to the entire gathering, voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "My wife and I chose not to reveal my position immediately, because this isn't about my badge. This is about how quickly assumptions were made about who belongs in spaces like this." Chief Bennett steps forward, authority radiating off him. "I want statements from every responding officer. I want to know who received which calls, and why protocol was ignored." The officers blanch, realizing this is no longer a routine call, it's a career-defining mistake. Diane attempts to edge toward the exit, but a uniformed officer quietly shifts, blocking her path with a look that tells her her time of control is over. Commissioner Jackson approaches Darnell and Amara, his voice grave. "On behalf of the county, I extend my deepest apologies for this failure of judgment and procedure. This is not how our community should treat its citizens, least of all those who have dedicated their lives to protecting it." Amara's father steps forward, phone raised. "I've recorded everything," he announces, his voice steady. "Every word Ms. Reynolds said. Every action taken." At the center of the hall, Darnell stands tall, no longer the genial groom, but every inch the sheriff, commanding respect with presence alone. "Today was meant to be a celebration of love," he says, his voice echoing through the silent room. "Instead, it became a reminder of why I swore to uphold the law in the first place." The guests watch in stillness, the weight of his words pressing down like a stone. What began as joy, then collapsed into humiliation, had now transformed into something greater, a reckoning. 1 week later, the conference table at the county administration building gleams under fluorescent lights. Darnell sits at its head, uniform crisp, badge shining. Around him are county officials, legal counsel, and executives from Prestige Venues International, the parent company of Lakeside Gardens. The air is heavy with consequence. Darnell slides a USB drive across the polished oak table. His voice is steady, deliberate. This contains all evidence related to the incident at my wedding. Video from multiple guests, written statements, and a full timeline. County attorney plugs the drive into her laptop. On the wall screen, Amara's father's recording flickers to life. Diane's voice cuts through the speakers. Cold and unmistakable. People like you always think you're entitled to whatever you want. A ripple of murmurs sweeps across the conference room. More clips follow Diane pointing at black guests, insisting they couldn't possibly have booked the venue, her voice accusing Franklin of covering for trespassers. Each video clip lands like a gavel strike. We've collected sworn statements from 23 guests. Darnell continues, tone professional but edged with controlled fire. All describe a clear escalation of harassment during what should have been the happiest day of our lives. All eyes shift to Franklin. He shifts in his chair, Adam's apple bobbing. Ms. Reynolds has filed complaints before, he admits reluctantly. Mostly when the clientele was diverse. You mean when they were black or brown? Corrects the Prestige Venues executive. Her words clipped, unforgiving. Her tight jaw makes it clear corporate consequences are coming. Yes, Franklin concedes, not lifting his eyes. She's complained about decorations, parking, even music, but only for certain weddings. The county legal team exchanges grim looks. We're looking at multiple violations, says the lead attorney. False police reports, harassment, civil rights violations, misuse of emergency services. Chief Bennett leans forward, voice steely, and the responding officers fail to follow protocol. They acted on assumptions, not facts. They escalated instead of verifying. That's unacceptable. Commissioner Jackson steeples his fingers. This wasn't a single lapse. This was a systemic failure, law enforcement response, venue management, neighborhood association oversight, complicit in allowing bias to dictate action. Diane sits stiff in a navy suit that cannot disguise her shrinking presence. Gone is her smugness at the property line. Her attorney rises, voice oily. My client merely expressed concerns about unauthorized use of property adjoining her home. She had no way of knowing Sheriff Taylor's position. Darnell leans forward, eyes burning into him. This isn't about my badge. This is about assumptions made the second a black couple was seen celebrating at an exclusive venue. Had we been white, would anyone have questioned our right to be there? The silence is suffocating. Prestige executive clears her throat, breaking it. Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore is terminated as manager of Lakeside Gardens. His failure to protect clients is a breach of contract and ethics. Sheriff Taylor, Mrs. Taylor, we will refund all costs and provide compensation for the distress caused. In addition, Prestige Venues International will implement bias training across all properties nationwide. This will not happen again. Amara, in professional attire rather than bridal white, speaks for the first time. Her voice is calm but unyielding. This isn't about money. It's about ensuring spaces remain open and safe for everyone. Period. Chief Bennett distributes folders across the table. The department is launching mandatory training on bias protocols. Every officer involved is on administrative leave, pending review. Diane's attorney leans toward her, whispering urgently. She nods, lips pressed tight. My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms to avoid litigation, he offers. She recognizes her actions may have been misinterpreted. Misinterpreted. Amara repeats, her eyes locked on Diane. Her voice is steady, cutting. She said we didn't belong. She called the police on nothing but the color of our skin. Darnell rests a calming hand on his wife's arm, then slides a thick document forward. This goes beyond individual accountability. It's a proposal for systemic reform, venue oversight, police protocol revisions, neighborhood association accountability. One person's prejudice should never be allowed to cascade into a dangerous systemic failure. Commissioner Jackson studies the document, nodding slowly. We'll begin implementation immediately. Starting with a full review of complaint procedures and response protocols, the county attorney scribbles notes. Ms. Reynolds will face charges for filing a false report with possible additional civil rights violations. At the back, reporters type furiously. Headlines already forming as video of the wedding confrontation spreads nationwide. Darnell stands, his presence commanding, his voice both personal and official. This was never just about one wedding. It's about making sure every citizen can occupy public and private spaces without their legitimacy questioned because of appearance. As the meeting adjourns, Diane stares at the table, avoiding every eye in the room. Her once self-assured presence is now hollowed out by consequences far heavier than she ever imagined. When she made that first call, County Courthouse hums with activity, but Courtroom 3 carries a unique gravity. Every seat is filled with community members, reporters, even activists who traveled from neighboring cities. Diane Reynolds sits stiffly beside her attorney, almost unrecognizable. The immaculate highlights and confident posture are gone. Her hair hangs limp. Her suit a modest navy number fails to project the authority she once wielded so effortlessly. She avoids eye contact, her hands clenched together on the defense table. Judge Hernandez adjusts her reading glasses and addresses the room. The court has carefully reviewed the evidence submitted, including video footage and testimony from multiple witnesses. What is particularly troubling is the pattern of behavior that emerges in undeniable history of harassment. It's targeted against people of color. The prosecutor rises, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, this is not an isolated event. Ms. Reynolds has filed 17 complaints against Lakeside Gardens in the past 3 years. Of those, 15 involved minority families or gatherings. Her actions cannot be explained away as mere noise concerns. Gasps ripple through the public gallery. Diane stares at the table, her jaw tight. Prosecutor continues. Venue staff confirmed that Ms. Reynolds' interference was so consistent. Former manager Franklin Whitmore actually adjusted scheduling to avoid conflicts with her only when the clients were black or brown. Judge Hernandez frowns. So the venue itself enabled this discriminatory behavior? Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor replies. Mr. Whitmore has provided a sworn statement admitting as much. Diane's attorney stands quickly, voice strained. Your Honor, my client is a longtime resident of this community. Her complaints stemmed from legitimate property concerns, noise, traffic, parking. The judge cuts in sharply. Curious, then, that those concerns only applied when the celebrants were minorities. The prosecutor requests permission to play Exhibit 14. The courtroom screen flickers to life, showing Diane's face twisted with indignation as she tells officers, "Why would these people be at a place like this?" Her voice drips with disdain, the emphasis undeniable. Diane crumples inward as her own words echo against the courtroom walls. Witnesses follow neighbors, venue staff, a realtor all, recounting similar stories. One after another, they describe patterns of exclusion, selective enforcement, and intimidation. The cumulative weight is devastating. Finally, Diane's attorney whispers urgently to her. After a long pause, she nods, her composure fractured. Her attorney rises. Your Honor, in light of the overwhelming evidence, my client wishes to change her plea to guilty on the charges of filing a false police report and obstruction of lawful business. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Judge Hernandez fixes Diane with an unflinching gaze. Ms. Reynolds, do you understand this means you waive your right to trial? Yes, Your Honor, Diane replies, voice barely audible. Very well, this court accepts the plea. When sentencing begins, Judge Hernandez's tone carries no softness. Ms. Reynolds, you weaponized law enforcement against innocent people based solely on their race. Your actions undermined public trust, wasted taxpayer resources, and endangered lives. For this, you will perform 200 hours of community service at the Cultural Diversity Center. Pay a $10,000 fine to cover emergency response costs. Complete a court-mandated racial sensitivity program. You will also serve 2 years of probation. This court does not tolerate weaponized prejudice. In the gallery, Darnell sits quietly, dressed in plain clothes rather than his sheriff's uniform. Amara holds his hand, her gaze steady. This is not about vengeance, but justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarm. The new neighborhood association president announces Diane's removal. Her actions do not represent our community's values. Effective immediately, we are implementing safeguards to prevent discriminatory abuse of power. 3 days later, a for sale sign stands on Diane's manicured lawn. Movers load her belongings as neighbors watch silently from porches and windows. No farewells, no sympathy. Her once commanding social capital has evaporated, leaving only isolation. "Good riddance," mutters one neighbor to a reporter. 6 months later, Lakeside Gardens hosts a very different event. White tents line the lawn for a community unity forum. Banners red, creating spaces for everyone. Darnell, in uniform this time, stands at the podium. 6 months ago, my wedding was disrupted by assumptions about who belonged. Today, we gather not to dwell on that pain, but to ensure it sparks real change. The new management unveils a bold anti-discrimination policy. Police leadership outlines new training protocols. The crowd, diverse, hopeful, nods in agreement. Where Diane Reynolds once stood as a gatekeeper of exclusion, the community now rises, determined to build something better. Couple after couple steps forward, their stories echoing one another. A Latina bride describes being asked twice to produce her contract, while the white couple before her was waved through without question. A gay couple recalls being seated separately from their own guests at a venue dinner until they demanded correction. Each testimony draws solemn nods from the audience, underscoring that what happened to the Taylors was part of a broader pattern, not an isolated incident. Mara listens intently, her hand resting protectively over her belly. When the last couple finishes, she rises again, her voice steady but charged with emotion. What we're hearing today is not just about weddings. It's about dignity. It's about whether people are recognized as rightful participants in the spaces they've each chosen to inhabit. These stories reveal the fractures in our communities, but also the resolve to mend them. The crowd murmurs in agreement. Cameras flash as journalists capture her words. At the back of the tent, Franklin Whitmore lowers his head, visibly moved. Though disgraced, his decision to participate in the forum has earned him cautious respect. For the first time in months, someone places a hand on his shoulder, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement that accountability is the first step toward redemption. Councilwoman Patel closes the forum with a challenge. Today we've outlined policies, but policies are only as strong as the people who enforce them. The real test comes when the next Diane Reynolds makes that call. Will we repeat the mistakes of the past, or will we respond with clarity, fairness, and courage? Applause ripples through the gathering, not thunderous but steady, as if the weight of responsibility is being collectively accepted. Outside, the lake glitters in the late afternoon sun. Children play near the water's edge, their laughter carrying across the lawn, a reminder of the kind of future this work is meant to protect. Darnell and Amara exchange a look, weary but hopeful. Their wedding day had begun in conflict, but its legacy now radiates far beyond them.